Arnold Robs, we're back with the Golem Remembered 1909 to 1980 Variations of a Jewish Legend. Pick up on, I believe it's chapter 3, page 58. Is this chapter 3? Yeah, page 58 of Yudl, Rosenberg's, and Chayim Bloch's Twice Told Tales. The story reaches its climax when an epidemic breaks out in Prague, killing hundreds of people, including two of Balberer's 5 children, though there are no other victims on his street. The mother had pleaded with her husband not to bring the remains of the Golem home because of the risk if they should be caught. Her anxiety apparently convinces Balberer that he is being punished for violating Rabbi Lowe's edict. Therefore, he places the corpses of his 2 children in one coffin and the remains of the Golem in the emptied one. The coffins are then taken at night to a special cemetery outside the city for victims of the epidemic. The legend ends with the kind of specific detail that often teases the reader of such tales to suspend disbelief. The men carried the Golem's coffin up to the gallows hill, which lies 1 mile and 200 yards from the Neustädter Gate on the Vienna State Road, and placed it on that side of the hill which is turned toward the city. That was on the evening of the 5th day of Adar. Although Bloch's collection has 9 more chapters, the 28th is the last one that has anything to do with the Golem. A rather strange fact considering the book's title. It is as though Bloch takes all of the remaining statements about the Golem, which he could not incorporate into the stories, and catalogs them in an appendix, which he calls chapter 28. Since an appendix is not usually found with 8 chapters yet to come, the aesthetic effect is devastating. The effect is not unlike having Dostoevsky decide to add a short sequel having nothing to do with Raskolnikov to Crime and Punishment. Rosenberg's work has much better unity, ending with the life of as the Golem does, of the Golem. Ending when the life of the Golem does. Separating, all right, I'm just going to keep botching paragraph after paragraph. Separating the 15 paragraphs of chapter 28 are rows of 3 asterisks. The paragraphs range from 1 to 18 lines. The shortest explains that the Golem could not be counted in a minyan, the minimum number of 10 adult Jewish males required for public prayer services. The longest discusses the Golem's exemption from any illness because of his supernatural ability to comprehend the new medicinal odor released each of the 24 hours in the Garden of Eden. 2 sections earlier, Bloch had strangely claimed, with no attempt to show the logical connection between morality and physiology, that the Golem was never ill, for he was immune from every impulse to do evil. Here Bloch seems to have overlooked the contradiction with the chapter in which the Golem is poisoned and feels pain until Rabbi Lowe heals him. 2 of the paragraphs discuss Jewish demonology and explain why Rabbi Lowe chose the name Joseph over Jonathan, an explanation that Rosenberg works effectively into his story of the creation of the Golem. 3 brief sections echo the discussions of 16th century Kabbalists like Moses Cordovero, who debated whether the Golem has any kind of soul. Bloch opposes Cordovero's view, declaring that the Golem is mute because, as an incomplete creation, he was unworthy that the Neshama, the light of God, dwell within him. He was inhabited only by Nephesh, sensory being, and Ruach, spirit. Knowledge. The Golem could have only in a small amount. The other 2 intelligence, Chakma, wisdom, and Bina, judgment, he could not be supplied with at all because there was no neshama dwelling in his being. On the subject of the Golem's sexual instinct,
which played no part in the earlier legends of the Golem, but which would become important in the works of Levick and Rothberg. Bloch dogmatically insists that the creature has none. For if he had had that instinct, no woman would have been safe from him. What did I do? Why did it turn dark here? All right. On the subject of free will, Bloch argues that since the Golem, like the animals and birds, demons and spirits, is able to see things hidden to man, he cannot be said to have free will, which allows man to choose between his good and evil impulses without any supernatural knowledge. And finally, claims Bloch, the Golem will be resurrected in some different form at the end of all human existence. Before the analysis of the 8 new stories, Bloch adds, after he has finished with the Golem, another change should be pointed out. Bloch takes the ending of Rosenberg's chapter 20, the last blood libel in Prague during Rabbi Leva's lifetime, the longest story in his little book, and turns it into a short new chapter which becomes chapter 24 of his collection. Rosenberg effectively ends his story with a 3-paragraph denouement of Rabbi Leva, though through the supernatural senses of the Golem, has proved the innocence of Aaron Gens, who had been in prison with his family because of the blood libel. After the rabbi sends an official report of the case to King Rudolph with a request for an audience at court, he successfully pleads the case for his people and wins a promise that no more such accusations could be made in his kingdom. Bloch gives Rabbi Lowe's audience with Kaiser Rudolph pardon, my child is texting me, much greater prominence, separating it from story proper and making it the climax of all stories to that point. If Rabbi Lowe's objective was to end the blood libel against the Jews of Prague in his lifetime, he succeeded. And this great victory, Bloch obviously feels demands more than 3 short paragraphs ending a 10-page story. However, since Bloch continues the rabbi's adventures for 12 more chapters, this climax comes in the wrong place and loses the special impact Bloch tried to give it. In expanding Rosenberg's 3 short paragraphs to 2 1/2 pages, Bloch enhances the details and adds some of his own, whereas Rabbi Leva simply reports on all the blood libels. For the last 10 years, Bloch adds a memorable descriptive sentence which both understates the anti-Semitism of generations and acknowledges the liberalism of the emperor. Although he had been brought up by Jesuits in the country of ever-smoking funeral pyres, the Kaiser was nevertheless not without feeling of justice towards the Jews. So he granted the request in a most gracious manner. Another interesting difference is seen when Rosenberg's journalistic matter-of-fact report, the king had a long conversation with him. Rabbi Leva never cared to reveal what was said, as compared to Bloch's more intimate record of this same information, dramatically placed in quotation marks as a happy Rabbi Lowe reports to his friends. I thank the Lord, praised by his name, that I have succeeded in removing from this earth the wrong of blood accusation. I thank the Lord, praised be his name, that I have succeeded in removing from this earth the wrong of blood accusations. The Kaiser spoke to me about a half hour and gave me his royal word that from now on he would not only root out blood accusations in his country, but would also treat the Jews the same as other subjects of his kingdom, and would protect their rights. Bloch then summarizes the highlights of the Kaiser's proclamation, adding one not found in Rosenberg, that in any Christian accusation of a Jew, the fact must be established by 4 incontestable witnesses. Bloch's 8 new stories about the Maharal. Whether Yudl Rosenberg was familiar with some version of the last 8 stories that Bloch recorded in his collection is unknown. If he were and he elected to omit them, his reason probably was that they did not refer to the Golem. However, because they give the student of the Golem legends more insight into anti-Semitism in the late 16th century and into the uncanny attributes of the Maharal acting on behalf of the persecuted Jews, these stories merit mention. At the end of the third one, Kaiser Rudolph in Captivity, chapter 31, Bloch explains that Rabbi Loew kept a secret book in which he recorded these events. Only after his death, the Kaiser too had already departed, was the secret book discovered, since the only posthumous book of Rabbi Loew's available to Bloch was Hidush Aria, 1837, a commentary on some Talmudic tractates. Bloch simply pretends to have seen the manuscript. He then adds the moral underlying his book as well as Rosenberg's. He retells the stories so that future generations might know that God does not desert his people, Israel, and that just when their misery is at its worst, help is at hand. In each of the stories that follow, Rabbi Loew's reputation is enhanced by his magical powers, his Solomonic wisdom, and his devotion to his disciples. Only once in the Kabbalah does he require outside help, as he does in most of the Golem stories. Sometimes Bloch supplies two versions of the same story, the basic plot being given a different twist. As so often happens to stories passed down orally from one generation to the next. Two of the first three stories, chapter 29 and 31, deal with the rabbi's friendship with the Kaiser. In both cases, Rabbi Loew's magical ability to control another person's dreams saves the day. In the expulsion of the Jews, chapter 29, as a result of the Kaiser's edict expelling the Jews from his country on penalty of death and confiscation of all property, troubled Jews from far and wide came to Prague, to Rabbi Loew, who was considered among the Jews at the time as the head of the diaspora. The rabbi assures them that the whole matter will be resolved in their favor on the morrow. That night, Rabbi Loew's magic works. The Kaiser has a strange dream in which he becomes separated from his retinue while swimming in a river. The naked Kaiser gets lost in the forest, is threatened by some rough woodcutters, and is finally led back to the city by a beggar who supplies him with rags. The city people do not recognize their Kaiser in this attire, and he ends up wandering to Prague, where he enters the ghetto. The Hasidic love of parables is evident in the Kaiser's reflection. The fate of this people, with their great past and their present low state, is the semblance of my own. This people too was great once, and yet it is not recognized now. An old Jew finally believes the beggar stranger and takes him to Rabbi Loew, who cuts the Kaiser's beard, trims his nails, anoints his body with fragrant oils, and gives him more appropriate clothing. The only condition Rabbi Loew imposes on his monarch, pardon, my armpit's sticky, imposes on his monarch is his signature on 2 copies of a document to revoke the edict expelling the Jews. This the Kaiser gives willingly and then wakes up. He has dreamed the whole thing, or has it actually happened? The narrator of this folktale turns fantasy into reality with the perfect final touch. On the table is a copy of the newly signed document, and in a golden tray the Kaiser's recently trimmed whiskers and nails. Kaiser Rudolph in Captivity, chapter 31, is a variant of the same plot. This time, a troubled Kaiser Rudolph sends for Rabbi Loew and explains that he must reluctantly sign an anti-Semitic bill submitted to him by his ministers. The rabbi tries in vain to change his mind. When the Kaiser falls asleep in the rabbi's garden, he dreams that one of his rebellious princes has defeated him in battle and imprisoned him for 11 years. One day he suddenly sees Rabbi Loew, who promises to free him on the condition that he destroy the edict against the Jews. In this version, the sleepwalking Kaiser gives Rabbi Loew the key to his cabinet holding the papers and returns him to the castle. where he wakes up and expresses eternal gratitude to his Jewish friend for having saved him. In Solomonic Wisdom, chapter 30, the Kaiser invites Rabbi Lowe to help judge a difficult case involving a Gentile pork butcher who, after spying on his neighbor, a Jewish second-hand clothes dealer, and observing him counting some coins, reports to the police that the same number of coins have been stolen from him. When the Jew is arrested, it is his word against the butcher's. Rabbi Lowe solves the case in a manner that would have pleased Arthur Conan Doyle, pointing out that coins handled by a butcher would have fat on them. He suggests that these disputed coins be thrown into a kettle of boiling water. If fat comes to the surface, the coins belong to the butcher. Of course, the water remains clean and the clothes dealer is declared the rightful owner. Chapter 32, 33, and 34 have their sources in Sipparim, or in Jurasik's old Bohemian tales. Chapter 32 is the tale in which Rabbi Lowe conjures up the great Jewish leaders of the past for the entertainment of the Kaiser and his court, with the warning that there is to be no laughter. Chapter 33 and 34 are variations of the legend about the disappearing palace brought about by the rabbi's magic. In chapter 34, the guest being entertained is a count who steals a gold salt shaker. The purpose of these last 8 stories can only be to enhance the reputation of the great Rabbi Lowe. But they are ultimately disappointing. In most of them, he is reduced to a necromancy, to the kind of wizardry expected from a Merlin. Missing is the lofty motivation of the Golem stories, that of saving the Jews from the terrors of the blood libel and the threat of a pogrom. Instead, there is the petty vanity of the Kaiser satisfied by the court magician. Hans Ludwig Held's claim that in Bloch's collection, the legends of the Golem are closer to the spiritual and mystical than to the magical is contradicted by these last tales. Held may have had in mind a story like the Kabbalah, chapter 35, which Bloch probably got from C. Ludwig Kapper's tale, the great Rabbi Lowe and the Count. In Paschali's Sipparim, this is the story in which Rabbi Lowe is assisted by his colleague from Spain when a count orders them to teach him the secrets of the Kabbalah. Held must also have been thinking of Bloch's several allusions to the Sefer Yezerah and its Zeraphim formulas. The final story in Bloch's collection, The final story in Bloch's collection, Death, is one of the best. Rabbi Lowe wins his final victory but loses his life in the effort. After explaining how the rabbi, after the midnight lamentation, spends the next hour every night speaking with the souls of the dead in the Alt-New synagogue, Bloch tells how this nocturnal routine is followed by a terrifying nightmare on the 11th day of Elul, 5369. Rabbi Lowe sees himself before a great court with an open gate. Inside is an altar at which stands a threatening figure, eyes blazing lightning, with a bloody knife in his right hand. Before him stands a long line of the rabbi's pupils, whom he is killing one after the other. Both the rabbi's son-in-law, Rabbi Yitzhak, and Jacob ben Chayim Sasson, his favorite disciple, are awaiting their turn, but he tears the knife from the grasp of the assassin and commands him to stop. Aware that the dream message is another warning, he wonders what he must do to save the students. At this moment, he sees a strange light in the synagogue across the street and runs inside. Bloch takes what follows from Koop's Sagen und Erzählungen aus der Provinz Posen, 1893. It is also found in Judah Bergman's Legenden der Juden, 1919. He finds the stranger of his dream, reading from the scroll in his left hand and calling out the blood-written names of those he is going to kill. The last name he heard was his own. It was at the foot of the list of death. Recognizing the angel of death, Rabbi Lowe springs at him and tears the scroll from his hand.
Safely back in his house, the rabbi repeatedly reads the list of names, recognizing not only those of his students, but those of all the members of his congregation. He is overjoyed with the realization that he has saved their lives. Suddenly, he notices that the corner of the scroll is missing. No matter how hard he tries, he cannot figure out whose name is on it. When a week passes with no deaths, a joyous Rabbi Lo holds a Thanksgiving feast at which he tells his followers what has happened. But soon after the feast, Rabbi Lo caught a violent cold, and on the 18th of Elul, 5369, his noble soul departed from its earthly tenement. On the piece of paper which had remained in the hand of the angel of death was his name. The noble teacher, in looking over the scroll for the missing name, had entirely forgotten to look for his own. He whose name had been the last one on the sheet was the first to fall. And that shall end this section. I got 6, 7, almost 8 pages to go. We'll stop at this section and continue next time. Goodbye, Ralph. Goodbye.